Hello, I'm Oscar Roach. Thank you for attending the IIL Agile and Scrum Conference 2020. In particular, thank you for giving me your time, of which about 45 minutes I'll take up now. So I'm going to discuss Toyota Kata, why it can help you adopt Agile, where it might fit, and what Toyota Kata actually is. Just a point of logistics, just to the right of the camera that I'm looking at is my prompts. So from time to time, you'll see me glance over to the right, and I trust you don't find that distracting. So let's get started. So first things first, and a question I imagine a number of you are asking, is what has the manufacturing of cars got to do with Agile? There are two answers. The first is this. So Toyota is widely regarded as the most successful car company in the world, perhaps the most successful manufacturer in the world. And the reason for this judgment, I guess, has been made on sustained performance and longevity. So a lot of research and a lot of books have been written. What's brought about this sustained performance and longevity is they've got that through adaptation and innovation. So sustained performance and longevity is the judgment on performance, and it's been gained through adaptation and innovation. Now, my understanding is that Agile has actually been shortened from Agile innovation. So you can see the connection there. Sustained performance and longevity through adaptation and innovation. Toyota have been around for 70 years. Prior to making cars, they were making looms, cloth looms, as a number of you may know. Agile has been shortened from Agile innovation. But it's possibly the second answer that I found more interesting, and I didn't know this until I was asked to do this presentation about 2 months ago, and I started to do some additional research on Agile, and I found out, I didn't know this before, that it was actually began outside of the IT world. So in the Harvard Business Review, April 2016, written by Rigby, Sutherland and Takeuchi, was this statement, and I'll read it to you if you don't mind. A more reasonable starting point for Agile might be the 1930s, when the physicist and statistician Walter Stewart of Bell Labs began applying PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDCA, as a lot of you may know, PDSA cycles to the improvement of products and processes. Stewart taught his iterative and incremental development methodology to his mentee, W. Edwards Deming, who used it extensively in Japan in the years following World War II. Now, those of you who have been involved in continuous improvement now or before, I'm sure will have heard of Deming. Toyota hired Deming to train hundreds of the company's managers, eventually capitalising on his expertise to develop the famous Toyota production system, which is the primary source of today's lean thinking. So I thought that was a really interesting reference. And I've got one of my clients, a long-term clients, has an operations manager. And he said, you know, in the CI world, the continuous improvement world, we get these fads or things come through, or new things come through from time to time. Some of them stick, reality, most of them don't. He always says that if you do the research into these things that come through, and through that research, you find a common link to some base foundational principle, then there's a reasonable chance that what's being proposed or what you're learning about is going to be of value. And this was the case here. I thought, this makes a lot of sense. There's a connection from a long time ago to a base principle of PDCA or PDSA. I really like that. And it really gave me comfort in that Agile is something that's going to be able to add value. All right, but the question is, why bother? So Agile makes us adaptive and innovative, but why bother? Why is that important? And there's a very good reason for that, particularly now and even more so in the future, because right now we are less sure than ever of what the future is going to look like in the business world and overall. And look, I'm recording this on April the 23rd. You all know what we're in the middle of. I know you're watching it in June or after, but we're right in the middle of this coronavirus crisis, and no one saw that one coming. So the business world and overall, the future is not clear. So to illustrate that, if you consider that road that you can see in the picture there, 20 or 30 years ago, we were standing a fair way back from that corner. We had a long, straight path in front of us. It was reasonably easy to see what to do. We could plan ahead much more reliably back then. But now we get closer and closer to that corner, and so there's a bend coming in the road, one, but also two, it's getting harder and harder to see around that bend. So now we're closer to the corner, and it's getting harder to see around that bend. So planning is not going to be as effective as it was. So the most success is going to come to those who are best at adapting quickly. So we get to that corner, We can't see around. We know we have to go around it. The success is going to come to those who do it best, who can adapt really quickly. That's why it's important to consider and attempt to be adaptive and innovative. All right, let's have a look at the Agile model. I think it's important that I set some foundations here, and this is my simple understanding of the Agile model. And it's based on a set of values and principles. My point of reference for this was the Harvard Business Review May 2016 article, a follow-on from what I showed you earlier, by the same authors, Rigby, Sutherland and Takeuchi. What I understood from this was there's 4 values. One is people over processes and tools. The second is responds to change rather than follow a plan. The third is working prototypes over excessive documentation. Fourth is customer collaboration over rigid contracts. Now, I found these really interesting. Something struck me about these principles that I haven't seen before in other models or whatever it may be. And that is that it was take something away and replace it with. So if you look at the first one, take away tools and people go over. Take away process and tool, not take away, but reduce the emphasis on process and tools and emphasize people. Reduce the emphasis on following a plan and respond to change. Reduce excessive documentation and work with prototypes. Reduce rigid contracts and work on customer collaboration. So really, I was quite interested in the way this had been structured. It's a little bit different to some of the things we've seen before. Take something away or reduce the focus on something and replace it with something else. Reduce the focus on something or replace it with something else. Found that quite interesting and sort of follows on from what's coming in about 5 minutes, or leads into what's coming in about 5 minutes. So let's have a look at a little bit more detail of each one of those 4 that we've got listed there. Under people over process and tools, there was 3 subheadings, if you like. The people need to be motivated, supported and trusted. And you'll notice that if I put in italics trusted, if people are going to innovate and adapt, then they must be in an environment where they can be trusted. They won't innovate, they won't adapt if they don't feel trusted. So that's critical. That's why I've highlighted that. We could spend a whole day, 2 days a week talking about trust and how you build trust in the workplace. But that's not what this presentation is about. All right, so for respond to change rather than follow a plan, a couple of things there. Okay with learning things that altered direction. And then we plan only those tasks that won't have changed by the time they need to be done. So that if you think of that road that I showed earlier, we could plan a lot of things because they're not going to change by the time they need to be done. We could see a fair way ahead. But when we come to that corner, we've got to go around the road, the tasks are going to change. So we can't plan. Planning ahead doesn't work anymore. It's actually, I'll show you later why it's a little bit counterproductive. So plan only those tasks that won't have changed by the time they need to be done. 2, for working prototypes, experiment on small parts with a few customers for short periods and resolve disagreement with experiments rather than endless debate. Appeals to authority. We'll spend a bit of time on that point of resolve disagreement with the experiments. It's a really interesting one and leads straight into one of the benefits of using the Toyota Kata patterns. Lastly, customer collaboration over rigid contracts. Specifications evolve because customers can rarely predict what they actually want. I laughed a little bit when I saw that statement. We're getting a database developed at the moment and we're doing a couple of other projects in response to public distancing. And that's us. We think we know what we want, but as we develop it and do each stage, we're realising weren't clear on what we wanted. So what we want becomes clearer. And that's fair. I think that's understandable. As we go around that bend in the road, we can see a little bit further. We can see a little bit further. It's easier to see what we want once we start going around the bend. And then lastly, work focused on what the customer will ultimately value. So that's customer collaboration over rigid contracts. Just a point here, when this discussion that we're having won't view Agile as a methodology. So another thing I found quite interesting when I was looking into and building my base understanding, my simple understanding of Agile was this. If I put Agile methodology into Google, I got a whole different suite of references. If I put Agile behaviors or Agile principles into Google, I got a completely different set. So clearly there's it seemed to me there was two views out there. Agile is a methodology, and Agile is a set of values and principles. This presentation is based on the thinking that Agile is based on a set of values and principles. Well, a little bit more on my simple understanding of the Agile model. That is the actual application in the workplace, whether it be in IT or marketing or sales or product development or wherever you're using this model, is that it's based on a cyclical thing: learn, analyze, design, build, test, and deploy. So learn, analyze, design, build, test, and deploy. Continually goes round and round. And what I liked about that when I saw that was that you can see how it ties really closely into Plan, Do, Check, Act, or Plan, Do, Study, Act, as we saw in slide 2 or slide 3, whatever it was. So here's that tie-in that goes back to a base principle. How is that deployed? The learn, analyze, design, build, test, deploy. Shane Hayes, who I'll explain who he is at the end of my presentation, illustrated it this way, that we've got overlapping cycles of learn, analyze, design, build, test, deploy. So as we're working through the project, whatever it may be, designing a new software application or developing a new product or whatever your game is, we have iterative cycles of development, one overlapping the other. We learn, we do, we learn, we do, we learn, we do. So that's how it builds. Note, please, that Agile, as my understanding is, it's not a process. It's not a suite of tools that, if rolled out, means we are Agile. I'm much more familiar with the lean and continuous improvement world than I am with Agile, but we've suffered the same thing. It was only until probably quite recently, maybe the last 5 years, where it sort of we started to realise that lean is not a process. It's not a suite of tools that should be rolled out and then we can say we are lean. Companies that did that, and that's 85% of them, as the data would show, companies that did that, the lean program was never sustained. So just to emphasise the point here, it's not a process. Agile is not a process. It's not a suite of tools that, if rolled out, we are Agile. So if it's not that, then what is it? Then it's a mindset or a set of behaviours. It's innovation with a constant customer focus, and it's a radical alternative to command and control. So let's tie this together and consider also culture, because when you adopt a set of values and principles, and if you consider what I said earlier about reducing the emphasis on something and replacing it with something else, so reducing the emphasis on process and tools and replacing it with an emphasis on people, when you do that, things are going to change. The feel in the place is going to change. So let's consider the impact on culture and how that ties in. So we define culture as the sum of people's habits as they go about their daily work, or you could say, and more simply, the way things get done around here. So culture is just the way things get done around here. So if we consider this, if we adjust our behaviours or the way things get done around here and we adjust our habits, culture will change. So rather than focus on culture change, let's focus on behaviour change and adjusting our habits. Because if we do that, the culture will have changed. So let's think about that and how it ties in. So if we focus on people over processes and tools, if we respond to change, if we work with prototypes, if we collaborate more heavily with the customer, our behaviours and habits will have changed. The culture of our organisation will change. And if we apply this iterative pattern that's based on Plan, Do, Study, Act, or Plan, Do, Check, Act that I showed earlier, our culture will change. Tie that in with those principles, the 4 principles, and our behaviour and habits will change. Our culture will change, guaranteed. And tie that in with couple that in with servant leadership, represented by curiosity and humility. So there we have a model. But we have a problem. So I've heard Mike Rother, the author of Toyota Kata, say this quite regularly. We have a model, but we have a problem. And the problem is this: models alone won't change our behaviours. And I'll say that again. Models alone won't change our behaviours. In fact, this is what Mike says exactly. He says, hoping to create new behaviours by explaining or trying to convince people doesn't really work. The explanation may be correct, but it doesn't change us. So what he's saying there is we can have the best PowerPoint presentation. We can have the most convincing model presented to us, but it won't, or very rarely does it change our behaviours. So telling alone doesn't work. Just telling people of a model doesn't work. And there's a really good reason for this. And the reason is because changing behaviours or habits requires a rewiring of our brain. Look, that's a whole new topic in its own right as well, and I'm certainly not someone qualified to speak on how the brain functions, but I can illustrate what I'm talking about. Those of you who are watching, if you can just fold your arms as you would normally fold them, what you'll notice is that you probably did it without thinking, and I said to do it, and you just did it. There was no thought went into it. But if I say to you, uncross them or unfold them and fold them in the opposite way. So what I'm asking you now is, how did that feel? Does it feel a little bit awkward, a little bit uncomfortable? Did you have to concentrate, as I do, to get your hands into the right place? Now, if you did that often enough, it would feel comfortable. But the reason that feels a bit uncomfortable and we have to concentrate is because we're rewiring the brain. Because in my case, I've been doing it this way for 50 years. So that's the way my brain's wired. So giving me a model alone is not going to change our behaviours. But as with all problems, there is a countermeasure, and one countermeasure is using katas. And I'm talking about katas in general, not Toyota Kata yet. So one countermeasure is using a kata. And a kata is a thing that helps you develop a way. So a kata is a thing that helps you develop a way. What you see at the start of a kata is not what you have at the end. And I'm going to illustrate that. What you see at the start is not what you have at the end. So originally I had the Karate Kid pictures up here, but I was asked to remove them because of potential copyright issues. So, and you can view these with those YouTube links that I've got listed on the screen, view these clips. What you see at the start, early on in the movie, when Mr. Miyagi is coaching the young boy, what we see is wax on and wax off. And it's quite deliberate. It's quite painstaking and it's quite deliberate. Wax on, wax off. That's what we see at the start. What we have at the end, if you watch the last scene, is we have an innate block. So about 8 seconds in, when the young boy is fighting the older blonde guy, about 8 seconds in goes to kick him in the head, neck, shoulder area, and what you see is an innate block. So what we have is an innate block. You can hardly see it. You have to slow the video down to see it. So what we see at the start is wax on, wax off. What we have at the end is an innate block right at the end. So a kata is a thing that helps you develop a way. Now, what I can show you is yours truly and how I used a kata to help develop my, help me with golf. I play golf not as often as I'd like, but reasonably often. And I've played golf for probably 40 years. What I tend to do when I get tired, or when I start to lose concentration, with golf there must be a centre pivot. For those of you who have played golf, there must be a centre pivot through here, keeps central, doesn't move. What I tend to do when I get tired is I sway. So I move from the right and the left as I swing through the ball. So I move from the right to the left. It causes me to push to the right. Had 3 lessons in my life. One was 2 years ago. And the guy who was coaching me said, "You sway." I said, "No, I sway. I've swayed for 40 years and I've been told twice before that I do it." So that telling me I sway wasn't helping me. And then after about 3 minutes, he said to me, "So just put your hands in your pockets and go and think and do this." He said, "Do right pocket right, left pocket left. Right pocket right, left pocket left." And I thought to myself, I'll bet this works because he's just given me a kata. What you see at the start is not what I'm going to have at the end. So I practiced that right pocket right, left pocket left. And if I practice it enough, what you'll see is me not swaying, me rotating my hips. So you can see it there in that second slide. That was taken on Sunday, and that ball went dead straight. What you see at the start is right pocket right, left pocket left. What you have at the end is rotation of the hips. And I am sorry, that's at our local country course. Quite often there's kangaroos up on that course, and I apologise for them none being in the background there. I was really hoping there would have been. It would have added a lot of value to that photo. All right, so a kata is a thing that helps you develop a way. Let's talk about Toyota Kata now. So Toyota Kata is a thing that can help you develop the way, and the way we're talking about in Toyota Kata's case is scientific thinking, PDCA. Scientific thinking is a mental framework for approaching goals and obstacles or problems. It's a bit different to the scientific method. Scientific thinking is also, and I'll read from the slide, a continuous comparison between what we predict will happen next, seeing what actually happens, and adjusting our understanding and actions based on what we learn from any difference. And that ties in with the cycle that you saw earlier from Shane, a continuous comparison, continuously going on. What we predict will happen next, seeing what actually happens, adjusting our understanding and actions based on what we learn from any difference. So that's what scientific thinking is. Why is that important? You've already seen this slide. Why do we need to develop this way? Exactly the same reasons as for becoming adaptive and innovative. So let's understand a little bit about why Toyota Kata itself actually came about, because it's an interesting, I think it helps our understanding and helps us see value in Toyota Kata if we understand why it came about, why and how it came about. So lean or continuous improvement was discovered in Japan and around about the mid-80s and was given this name lean by the consulting world, probably, I suspect it was. We're guilty of that from time to time. So it was given this name. And what we encouraged organisations and what other organisations did for a long time was copy. So they copied the tools and practices and they copied the way results were trying to be improved. It didn't work. So they copied the tools and practices, it didn't work. And one of the reasons it didn't work was because there was no consideration for context, which is the biggest factor of which is people. And the data shows that 85% of people who copied organisations that copied the lean tools and practices, it wasn't sustained and it fell away. So something was missing. Something was clearly missing. And Mike Rother and his researchers at University of Michigan recognised this. So they went in search of what was missing. About 2003, Mike came up with 2 research questions. The first research question was this: what are the unseen managerial routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success with continuous improvement and adaptation? So that was the first question. What are the unseen managerial routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success with continuous improvement and adaptation? And this was the answer. Underneath that visible stuff was something less visible. And this is really important. What was less visible, and they took through their research over about 4 or 5 years, they saw this time and time again, was a systematic scientific way of thinking and acting, and managers as teachers of that way. So we had this visible stuff, 5S and all those things, Kanban, all those things you see and hear, you can see and hear about, but underneath was this less visible stuff. Systematic scientific way of thinking and acting, and managers as teachers of that way. Now, what that meta skill, the lady on the right, and the meta skill is implying is that less visible stuff can be taken into any situation and applied, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be supply of a service, whether it be sport, it really doesn't matter. So a meta skill means something that can be taken and applied in many different situations and contexts. So there was the first answer. We had this less visible stuff. They discovered this less visible stuff. So illustrated there's the question, there's the answer. But remember, that's just a model. That less visible stuff is just a model. And we've already said the models alone won't change our behaviours. And there's plenty of evidence of that. So as a consequence of that, there was a second research question. And this second research question was, how can other companies develop similar routines and thinking in their organisations? So the first question discovered a model. That gave rise to the second question, because models alone don't change behaviours. How can other companies develop similar routines and thinking in their organisations? Just talking about the less visible stuff wouldn't have worked. The answer was 2 kata, the improvement kata and the coaching kata. And this is what's covered in the Toyota Kata practice guide, the Toyota Kata book, and Toyota Kata culture. So remember I said a kata is a thing that helps you develop a way. A kata is a thing that helps you develop a way. 2 kata were identified, not discovered. 2 were identified in answer to the second question. How did they tie in with this less visible stuff? What was the connection between these 2 kata and the less visible stuff? Well, it's this. The improvement kata is a pattern, just like right pocket right, left pocket left. The improvement kata is a pattern we can follow and apply to help us develop systematic scientific way of thinking and acting. The coaching kata, again, right pocket right, left pocket left, is a pattern that we can apply to help us become teachers of that way. So the improvement kata is a pattern we can apply to help us become systematic scientific thinkers. The coaching kata is a pattern we can apply to help us become teachers of that way. What you see at the start is the visible stuff. It's things like a coach with a pocket card and a storyboard and a learner. Those are the things you can see. Only through practice, only through regular practice will we end up with the less visible stuff. So this was the answer to the second question, 2 kata, the improvement kata and the coaching kata. We start with the visible stuff. Through practice, we will end with the less visible stuff. So what is the improvement kata? Let's have a look at that in a little bit of detail, and then I'll expand on each section. So this is a summary, then I'll expand on each of the 4 steps. Firstly, we have get the direction or challenge. This is where we understand where we're headed. We get our direction or challenge. What is the end point? And how are we going to define that? The second step of the improvement kata is to understand where we are now. Understand where we are now. Facts and data. Now we are clear on our gap. The third step of the improvement kata is to establish our next target condition. Some interim point between where we are now and our ultimate goal, but some interim point here. The benefit, and the reason we do that, I'll highlight in the slides coming. But I also like to think of the target condition as a condition we're going to target, a state we're going to target. It's not a set of numbers. And it always has a by when day. And then the fourth step of the improvement kata is we conduct our experiments to get there. The whole model is PDCA based, but in particular, PDCA becomes really obvious in conducting experiments to get there. Point to emphasise, the improvement kata is not an improvement method. Please be clear. And this is a misconception that's out there, certainly in the lean world, in some parts of the lean world, is that the improvement kata is a method. It's not, and it should not be viewed as a method. It's a pattern for starting to learn scientific thinking. Through practice, so through the improvement kata, through practice will help us develop this less visible stuff, the systematic scientific way of thinking and acting. All right, so what's the coaching kata? The coaching kata are 5 questions. What's the target condition? What's the actual condition now? Then there's a reflection. Then we say what obstacles are stopping us from reaching our target condition, which one will we work on? And then what's your next step? And then how quickly can we see what you've learned? So let's just consider these questions, and I'm just going to turn to my side so I can illustrate this a little bit clearer. What's the target condition? What's the interim state we're heading for? What's our condition now? What's our actual condition now? Our reflection is essentially asking ourselves, what's just happened and what have we learnt? Then we say, what obstacles are stopping us from reaching our target condition based on where we're at now, what we've just learnt, and which one are we going to work on? Then what's our next step, and how quickly can we see what we learned from that? So that's the 5 questions of the coaching kata. Again, it's not a coaching method. It's not a method. It's a pattern for starting to learn coaching. Through practice, through done often enough, we'll become teachers of scientific thinking and acting. So it's a pattern for starting to learn coaching. If we practice it enough, the component of the less visible stuff it ties into, it'll help us become teachers of scientific thinking and acting. Where does it fit? So let's just clarify where the coaching kata fits in with the improvement kata. Firstly, the coaching kata requires the use of a storyboard maintained by the learner. Then the coaching kata is practiced by a leader during step 4 of the improvement kata. So using a storyboard maintained by the learner, the coaching kata is practiced by a leader during step 4 of the improvement kata. So the coaching kata fits in right there where that blue arrow's popped up. So using a storyboard maintained by the learner. Coaching Kata is practiced by a leader during step 4 of the improvement Kata. So that's where the coaching Kata fits in with the improvement Kata. All right, let's just reflect on why that second research question was really important. How can we help companies develop this less visible stuff? Essentially was what that question was. So what we understand was that telling alone doesn't work. Remember, models alone won't change behaviours. Mike just writing a book and telling us about the less visible stuff would not have made much difference. Might have sold a few books, probably wouldn't have changed many behaviours. Wouldn't have actually achieved the development of that less visible stuff. Think about this, please. Just sending people to Agile training may not change behaviours either. They may need a thing to help them develop the way. They may need a thing to help them develop the way. And also the boss commanding people to improve, be customer obsessed, be inventive and innovative, that may not work either. They may need help. They may need a thing to help them develop the way. So this is why this second research question was critical. All right, let's have a little bit more detailed look at the improvement Kata and the 4 steps. So step 1 is get the direction or challenge. Why should we do this? Why? Because our work needs to be focused on what the customer will actually value. Remember, I said that in slide 6, one of the principles and values illustrated in the HBR article. So those contributing will understand our overall direction. If I understand my overall direction, then I'm much more likely to buy into it. So these are the why. Why is it important? The first thing we do, rather than jumping in and problem solving, the first thing we do is we get our direction or challenge, because we need to focus on what the customer will value, and for those contributing, we'll have an understanding of our overall direction. So what are the elements of getting the direction or challenge? Customer oriented, as I said. Who is the customer? What needs to be in place for them to be better off? Questions worth asking. What value are we delivering now? What should it be, and how might we measure that? And the second question that might be worth asking is, how fast do we deliver value now? What should it be? How might we measure that? It should be balanced. A challenge should be balanced. And this is important, and I haven't got enough time to explain this in a lot of detail. I hope it won't be misunderstood, but it should not compromise what's important to the supplier. Now, that doesn't mean the supplier doesn't need to adjust and alter and improve their ways, but it shouldn't compromise what's important to the supplier. Meaning, it shouldn't compromise quality. What we need to deliver for the customer, we should never compromise quality. Or if it's in the manufacturing world, we should never compromise safety. Now, sometimes it's the balancing aspect of a challenge which makes it the challenge, makes it harder to achieve. And it also should be measurable. The reason it must be measurable, our goal or our challenge, is so we can answer the question of, have we got there? If it's not measurable, you'll never truly be able to answer that, and the risk of going around in circles increases. And lastly, and Beth Carrington, who's done a lot of Toyota Kata work and training and that in the States, has said this about 2 years ago. She said that the challenge goal is the connector between the vision and the improvement activities. The challenge goal is the connector between the vision and the improvement activities. And I've illustrated that with that cloud up the top. We've got the vision out to the right. Sustainably deliver more value faster, very blanket statement, general statement. How does it, through quite contained statements in our direction or challenge, which are customer-oriented, balanced and measurable, we can connect our vision to what's actually happening in development in our workplace. So we have a vision, which is quite general and wishy-washy, it tend to be. We can have a vision, quite general. Through the challenge, we can connect our activities, the real work, if you like, the real activities, to the vision. And I think it's a way of getting the vision to become real, rather than just something out there that nobody knows or understands. All right, let's have a look at step 2 of the improvement Kata, which is grasp the current condition, same as before. Why should we do this? So you can identify a sensible point of focus, and also so you have a feeling for the gap. We should consider what's happening now, which is data, which is the measurables, time and errors, but also its facts. What is happening that is giving rise to the data? So please remember that data is just a product of something. We only have data if something's happened. The facts are what is happening. So to understand, to truly grasp our current condition, we need the data for sure, but we also need to gather the fact of what's actually happening, which is creating that data. So many times when people told me, yep, we've got the current condition, you just see a whole range of data. But if the facts aren't there that have given rise to the data, what's actually happening, then it's not a true understanding of the current condition. So data is a product of what's happening, please remember that. Data is an important part of the whole story, but it is not the whole story. You need to find out what's happening. Go and see and ask why. So we need to find out what's happening, what's creating that data or contributing to that data. We ask why. So then listen. Now, in grasping the current condition, there are no solutions came up with. There's no prescribing solutions or jumping here or jumping there. It's finding out what's actually happening, going see and asking why, then listening. There's no solutions presented at this stage. All right, improvement Kata step 3, establish your next target condition. Why? Because it helps to break the gap into chunks. It can be a little less daunting. But more importantly, it helps us respond to change rather than following a plan. If we set a first stage in our journey towards our goal, and we strive for that, we're going to learn things along the way. That's the great part about it. We're going to learn things along the way that will help us set our next target condition. We'll learn things along the way to that will help us set our next one. You can see the 2 small circles to the right of establish your next target condition. They represent future ones. So we respond to change rather than following a plan. We don't identify our next target condition, our third or subsequent one, until we've achieved our first one. So to ensure that we respond to what we learn at each stage. So this is why setting a target condition is important. This is the bit I mentioned this about half an hour ago, 20 minutes ago. And I thought about this because I was a project planner. Up until I read Toyota Kata in 2011, I was a project planner. And I was told I was a very good one. But in actual fact, when you think about it, preparing a project plan from the maximum point of uncertainty, which is grasping our current condition, actually doesn't make sense. So we've got our goal, we have we understand our current condition. To then write a project plan doesn't make sense because it's actually our maximum point of uncertainty. So it makes much more sense to establish some interim point to strive for being our next target condition. Preparing a project plan from the maximum point of uncertainty actually doesn't make sense. So in setting a target condition, we consider how a part of the system needs to be functioning, whether it be an IT system or an R&D project or whatever it may be, how a part of the system or outcome needs to be functioning, output needs to be functioning, with what outcome and by when. And the way I like to communicate a target condition to try and avoid people just putting numbers up, which is what tends to happen early stages, is a target condition is a condition we're going to target. So it's a state of our process, a way we want our process operating, and we're going to target that, or our system operating, or our software operating, and we're going to target that. Then, almost in the same breath, as soon as we have established our target condition, we say, why can't we do this now? What are our obstacles? Now, in Agile speak, I understand the word for obstacles, impediments. As soon as we've got our target condition, we say, why can't we do this now? What are our impediments? And that takes us straight into step 4, which is the fun one, the experimenting. So the reason it takes us straight in there is because now we have something that we need to work on. We work on the impediments to the condition we're targeting, which in turn is aligned with the challenge or goal. So we now have something we need to work on. We work on the impediments to the condition we are targeting, which in turn is aligned with the challenge or goal. So why do we experiment? No plan needs to cover everything, and that's okay. That's written about page 40-odd in Toyota Kata 2009 by Mike. That was the statement when I read that statement as a project planner for 30 years and done project planning at short courses at university and all that stuff. I read that and thought, oh, this is not for me. Thankfully, I kept reading. So it's important. Why do we experiment? Because no plan needs to cover everything. That's okay. Now, the next 2 are interesting ones and can be very tough ones for people like me to get their heads around. Firstly, and that is discovering the answer is okay. So not knowing the answer is okay, and discovering it through experimentation is fine. Discovering the answer as opposed to pre-knowing it is okay. And also, and this can be an even bigger mind shift, discovering what won't work is also okay. So discovering the answer is okay, and discovering what won't work is also okay. And the last point, and probably the one that often gets lost, but I think it's brilliant, and thanks Shane for making sure I put this in, it's a sound recipe for lifelong learning. Experimentation is a sound recipe for lifelong learning. If we don't experiment, we're forever limited to what we already know. If we don't step into the unknown with an experiment, we're forever limited to what we already know, and being limited to what we already know is not going to be innovative. It's going to be counter-innovative. So let's go back up to the top right of the slide. Remember, after we set our target condition, now we have something we need to work on. We work on the impediments to the condition we are targeting, which in turn is aligned with the challenge or goal. So we have a list of impediments. So what do? We pick one and we plan, do, check, adjust. We pick one impediment, we plan, do, check, adjust, or act, or plan, do, study, adjust, plan, do, study, act. So the plan is what happens before. What we will do, what do we predict, what will we measure to validate the prediction, and how. Then we do it. We do just what was planned, no more. We capture measurements, we note what is happening. Then we do our check after. What happened, what's the data showing, what went well, what didn't, compare to what was predicted, and the big question and the great question is what's been learned. And the bigger the answer there, the better. And then we adjust, and that's after as well. Given what's been learned, what are we going to do now? So essentially that's improvement Kata step 4, and that experimenting was mentioned in that slide I showed you about the 4 values and principles of Agile. So that's a bit of a summary of the improvement Kata. We've covered in a bit more detail steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're very near the end of my presentation, and I've got a couple of thank yous. First thank you is to Mike Rother for saying no. So the story there is that Mike was actually asked to do this presentation for very good reason, and a number of reasons he said no and asked IIL to contact me. And I'm really grateful for that. You guys can't see it, but just underneath my screen, I've got something written on the wall that says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So I really enjoy opportunities like this because it forces me to look into things and try and understand them quite simply to help me explain them. I want to thank Shane Hayes for saying yes. Shane is an Agile coach with Fidelity Investments in Westlake, Texas. So we do the Institute, TWI Institute does a 10-hour training program. We ran it in Austin in Texas in February. Shane was one of the attendees. Shane, I kept in contact with Shane since. As soon as IIL asked me to do this presentation, I contacted Shane and said, can you just please help me make sure that I don't misrepresent any aspect of Agile. So he's guided me and helped me through this. So thank you very much, Shane. And my last thanks goes to the IIL teams for being super helpful in not such good times. Okay, so we've come to the end of my presentation. Just a reminder, where might it fit, it being Toyota Kata, why and what it is. So I provided you with an illustration of my simple understanding of the model. People, respond to change, working prototypes, customer collaboration, tied in with an iterative, continuous plan, do, check, act-based cycle, all coupled with servant leadership represented by curiosity and humility. And as I said, it'd be hard to argue with that model, but we have a problem. Models alone won't change our behaviours. So a possible alternative, a possible solution or a possible countermeasure to this problem is the Toyota Kata patterns. Remember, a kata is a thing that helps you develop a way. The thing is the 2 katas that will help you develop a way, being Agile behaviours and principles. Apply those. So the improvement, we go from our visible stuff, coach and storyboard and learners and pocket cards, through practice and only through practice to this less visible stuff. Systematic scientific way of thinking that ties in with that illustration top left, and us being teachers of that way. So all I want you to consider is that Toyota Kata patterns may be worth trying. Now, IIL have my contact details. If you're interested in understanding and learning further, please contact them and they will direct you to me. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day. Whatever you may be doing, please make the most of it.